Recruiter laughs at 60-year-old coder. Hackathon winner steals the job offer next day. The laugh was the first thing that broke him. It wasn't a chuckle, a polite titter of disbelief. It was a bark, a sharp, percussive sound of genuine, derisive amusement that cut through the climate-controlled air of the Innovetech Solutions lobby. The sound bounced off the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, rattled the minimalist art installations, and seemed to curdle the expensive, complimentary espresso brewing behind the reception desk. Kyle, the recruiter, leaned back in his Eames chair, the fabric creaking under his smug, athletic frame. His teeth were impossibly white against his spray-tanned skin. He held Samuel's resume between two perfectly manicured fingers, as if it were a soiled piece of tissue. Kobold. Kyle's voice was loud, performative. He wanted the other candidates, the fresh-faced 20-somethings scattered around the lobby on modular sofas, to hear this. He wanted them to understand the hierarchy. Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, are you sure you're in the right place? We're a forward-facing, synergistic, paradigm-shifting entity. This isn't a museum. Another sharp laugh. This one was echoed by a few nervous snickers from the audience of younger applicants. They glanced at Samuel, their eyes a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment. Samuel Sterling felt a hot flush creep up his neck, a prickly heat that hadn't bothered him in decades. He was 60 years old. His suit, a classic charcoal wool, was older than the recruiter interrogating him, but it was immaculate. Pressed to a knife's edge that morning by his own hand, his tie was a simple, silk navy blue, knotted with a precision that had become second nature. His leather briefcase, resting by his feet, was worn at the corners, the brass latches dulled with the patina of age. But the leather itself was supple, cared for. It had been a gift from his late wife, Eleanor. When he landed his first major programming gig in 1988, he met Kyle's gaze. The young man's eyes were a pale, watery blue, and they held the casual cruelty of someone who had never known a day of real struggle. I'm quite sure, Samuel said, his voice steady, a low baritone that seemed to absorb the shrillness of the room. The job posting was for a senior systems architect. It mentioned a need for experience with legacy system integration. I have over 35 years of experience building and maintaining the very foundations that modern systems are built upon. Kyle's smile was a predatory legacy. That's a nice word for it. Like antique or fossil. Look, Grandpa, he said, dropping the last shred of professional courtesy. The word Grandpa hung in the air, an audible slap. We're looking for digital natives, people who speak in Python, not Latin. We need someone who can crush a hackathon on a Friday and deploy a new microservice architecture by Monday. We need agile. We need hungry. We need young. He tossed the resume onto the glass coffee table. It skidded across the surface and came to a stop next to a glossy magazine featuring Innovetech CEO, a man barely 40, on the cover under the headline, "The Future is Now." The scene was a perfectly framed diorama of humiliation. The light from the panoramic windows overlooking the city skyline was bright and unforgiving, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the deep lines etched around Samuel's eyes. The office smelled of industrial cleaning fluid and a faint, cloying scent of vanilla from an air freshener. You could feel the tension in the room, a thick, palpable silence that had fallen over the other candidates. They were witnesses, silent, complicit bystanders to a quiet execution. They stared at their phones, at their shoes, anywhere but at the old man being dressed down by the gatekeeper of their dreams. The power dynamic was absolute. Kyle was the lion, and Samuel was the aging gazelle who had wandered into the wrong watering hole. Thank you for your time, Samuel said. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. He stood slowly, his joints protesting with a faint ache. He bent to pick up his briefcase, his movements deliberate, dignified. He refused to let them see his hands tremble. He slid his resume, his life's work condensed into a single, now devalued page, back into the case and snapped the latches shut. The click was unnaturally loud in the silent room. He turned and walked towards the glass doors, his back straight. He could feel every eye on him. He didn't look back. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and he stepped out of the chilled artificial air of Innovetech and into the raw, humid heat of the city afternoon. The doors slid shut behind him, sealing him out. He was obsolete. A fossil, a ghost from a forgotten age. He didn't go straight home. He couldn't face the quiet emptiness of the house. The portrait of Eleanor on the mantelpiece, her smiling eyes full of a belief in him that he no longer possessed. He walked 4 blocks, the city noise, a dull roar in his ears. The concrete radiated heat, and the sun beat down on his shoulders. He ended up in a small public park, a sad little patch of green wedged between 2 towering skyscrapers. He found an empty bench under a wilting oak tree and sat down, the briefcase heavy on his lap. This was it, the breakpoint, the moment he had been dreading for years. For a decade, he had watched his industry, the world he had helped build, accelerate away from him. He had tried to keep up. He spent his nights and weekends learning new languages, studying new frameworks. He earned certifications. He contributed to open-source projects. But none of it mattered. They didn't see the code. They saw the gray hair. They saw the wrinkles. They saw a liability, a relic, a number 60. He opened his briefcase and pulled out his phone, a simple, functional model. He stared at the screen, at the picture of his granddaughter, Lily, her face bright with a 7-year-old's gap-tooth grin. He was doing this for her. After his daughter's divorce, he had stepped in, helping with bills, wanting to ensure Lily had the future she deserved. His pension was adequate, but not enough. Not for the world he wanted to give her. A wave of despair, cold and vast, washed over him. Maybe Kyle was right. Maybe he was a fossil. Maybe it was time to give up, to retreat into quiet obsolescence, and live out his remaining years in the gentle twilight of irrelevance. He felt a profound, crushing weariness settle deep in his bones. His shoulders slumped. The fire that had burned in him for 40 years. The passion for logic, for elegant solutions, for the pure, crystalline beauty of a perfectly written algorithm, flickered and dimmed. It was over. He sat there for a long time, watching the city rush past him, a river of indifferent faces. Then, his phone buzzed. A notification. Then another, and another. A cascade of them. A frantic, insistent vibration against his leg. Annoyed, he glanced down. It was an alert from a tech news app he subscribed to. Then a text from his daughter. Then a dozen more notifications from an app he rarely used. Twitter. He opened the first message from his daughter. "Dad, are you okay? Someone just sent me this video. It's everywhere," he frowned. Video. With a sense of dread, he tapped the link. The screen filled with a familiar scene. The Innovatic lobby. The video was shaky, filmed from a low angle, as if from a phone resting on a lap. He saw himself, sitting straight and proud. He saw Kyle, leaning back, his face a mask of condescending arrogance. And he heard the laugh, but the sound was even worse on the recording. Stripped of the room's acoustics, it was raw, naked, contempt. He watched the entire, brutal exchange. He heard the word grandpa again, and this time, he flinched. The camera zoomed in slightly on his face as he walked away, his back ramrod straight. A portrait of quiet dignity in the face of humiliation. The video ended, but the screen below it was a torrent of text. @CODEGRRL. This is disgusting. Kyle, from @Innovatic, is a disgrace to the entire industry. Experience is a feature, not a bug. #code has no edge. He blinked. #code has no edge. He scrolled. The hashtag was everywhere. @TechLeadTom. I've reviewed this man's open source contributions. Samuel Sterling is a legend. His work on early kernel schedulers is required reading. The fact that he was treated this way by some glorified HR bro is a systemic failure. We need to do better. #code has no age. @JessicaChen_VC. To the brilliant Samuel Sterling, if you're seeing this, my fund would be honored to back any project you want to build. Any DM me. And 2, @Innovatech, you just lost a multi-million-dollar investment. We're out. Effective immediately. #code has no age. Samuel's breath hitched. He kept scrolling, his fingers trembling now, but not from despair. It was a different feeling entirely. A strange, unfamiliar surge of something. Validation. Vindication. The video had been viewed over 1 million times. It was on Reddit, on LinkedIn, on every major news outlet's tech section. Famous programmers, CEOs of rival companies. Even a B-list actor known for playing a tech genius in a popular TV show had shared it. Their captions a chorus of outrage and support. A small, quiet part of him, the part that had been crushed on that park bench, began to stir. The ember of his resolve, which had dwindled to a near invisible speck, flickered. It caught on the kindling of 1,000 strangers' outrage. And then, with a sudden rush of oxygen, it ignited. Wasn't a raging fire of anger. It was a clean, white-hot flame of purpose. They had called him a fossil. They had called him a relic. They thought he was finished. He smiled, a slow, grim smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Okay, he whispered to the empty park bench, to the memory of Eleanor, to the image of Lily on his phone. Let's show them what a fossil can do. The backlash against Innovatech was a digital tsunami. The hashtag code has no age wasn't just a trending topic. It became a movement. Think pieces were written. Competing companies released statements reaffirming their commitment to diversity and inclusion, pointedly mentioning age, carefully curated image as a progressive, employee-first utopia shattered in less than 24 hours. Their stock, which had been on a relentless upward trajectory, plummeted by 12% overnight. The comments on their social media pages were a wasteland of fury. Their careers page was flooded with fake applications from characters in the Golden Girls. It was a full-blown PR apocalypse. Kyle was the first casualty. A terse formal statement was released by Innovatech's board. Mr. Kyle Jennings has been terminated, effective immediately. His behavior does not reflect the values of Innovatech. We have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. It was a hollow, predictable gesture, and the internet saw it for what it was, a desperate attempt to staunch the bleeding. The CEO, Julian Croft, a man who usually only communicated through carefully crafted press releases and softball interviews, was forced to schedule a live-streamed apology. He looked harried, his designer t-shirt wrinkled, the dark circles under his eyes poorly concealed by makeup. He spoke of accountability and internal reviews. He pledged to do better. He announced a new, company-wide sensitivity training program, but his apology rang hollow. He never mentioned Samuel's name. Samuel watched the live stream from his study, at home, the same room where he had taught himself C++ from a textbook the size of a cinder block. He felt a strange sense of detachment from it all. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted to become a cause célèbre, a symbol of corporate malfeasance. The flood of emails and LinkedIn messages was overwhelming. Job offers from Google, Amazon, and a dozen other tech giants. Invitations to speak at conferences. Requests for interviews from journalists. He ignored them all. The job offers were tempting, of course. They offered security, prestige, and more money than he had ever earned. But they felt tainted. They weren't offering him a job because of his resume. They were offering it because of his viral moment. He was a PR opportunity, a way for them to signal their virtue. He didn't want a handout. He didn't want pity. He wanted respect. The kind you earn, not the kind that's given to you by a trending hashtag. He wanted to prove Kyle wrong. Not to the world, but to himself. He needed to know that the fire still burned, that his mind, honed by 4 decades of relentless problem-solving, was still sharp. And then he saw it. Buried in an article about Innovatech's damage control efforts was a small, almost throwaway line. In an attempt to reconnect with the core developer community, Innovatech has announced it is moving forward with its annual Codebreak Hackathon this weekend, doubling the grand prize to a $250,000 senior developer contract and a seat on their new ethics advisory board. Codebreak Samuel knew it by reputation. It was one of the most grueling, prestigious hackathons in the country, a 24-hour marathon of caffeine-fueled coding, where the brightest young minds competed to solve a single, monstrously complex problem. It was a young person's game, a crucible designed to test speed, stamina, and fluency in the most cutting-edge technologies. It was everything Kyle had said he wasn't. A slow smile spread across his face. A contract. Not an offer born of pity, but a prize. Something to be won, to earn, on their turf, using their rules. The irony was a symphony. They had thrown him out the front door, and now he was going to walk back in through the main stage. He found the registration page. He filled in his name, his email, and his chosen programming language. There was a long list of modern, fashionable options. Rust, Go, Swift, Kotlin. He scrolled all the way to the bottom, to the other category, and typed in a single letter. C. He clicked submit. The confirmation message popped up on the screen. Welcome, contestant. See you at Code. The venue for Codebreak was a converted warehouse in the city's tech district. A cavernous space of exposed brick, polished concrete floors, and dangling Edison bulbs. The air was thick with the smell of stale pizza, energy drinks, and the nervous sweat of 200 ambitious coders. Massive screens lined the walls, displaying a countdown timer and a live feed of the contestants' avatars. The bass-heavy thrum of electronic music pulsed from hidden speakers. It was a temple built for the young, and as Samuel walked in, his simple wool blazer a stark contrast to the sea of hoodies and graphic tees. He felt a fresh wave of stares. But this time, the stares were different. They weren't laced with pity or embarrassment. They were filled with recognition, with awe, with a touch of fear. He was no longer an anonymous old man. He was Samuel Sterling, the man from the video. The living legend of #code has no age. Whispers followed him as he found his designated workstation. Is that him, dude? He's actually competing. My dad used to talk about his work on the Unix kernel. This is insane. He ignored them, setting up his station with methodical calm. He plugged in his own keyboard, a battle-scarred IBM Model M. Its loud, clacking keys a familiar comfort. He arranged his mouse, his notepad, and a single, silver thermos, filled with black coffee. He didn't need the multicolored cans of chemical courage the other contestants were chugging. He had his own fuel. The countdown timer on the big screen hit 0. The music cut out. Julian Croft, Innovetek's beleaguered CEO, walked onto the central stage, the spotlight finding him, making him squint. He looked even more tired than he had during his apology stream. Welcome, everyone, to Codebreak 2025, he began, his voice amplified by the PA system. This year, the challenge is special. It's a problem that has personally haunted me for years. It's a challenge that goes to the very heart of what we do. It's about efficiency, elegance, and finding the simple truth in a universe of chaos. An image flashed onto the giant screens. It was a complex data visualization, a swirling, chaotic nebula of interconnected nodes, representing a logistics and routing problem of staggering complexity. This is the Weaver's knot, Croft explained. It represents the shipping network of a global logistics company. Trillions of possible routes, millions of packages, thousands of vehicles, all changing second by second. The goal is simple: write an algorithm that can find the most efficient path for every single package in the system, in real time, with the lowest possible computational overhead. The current industry standard solution has an efficiency rating of 78%. The theoretical maximum is believed to be around 85%. No one has ever gotten close. He paused, letting the weight of the challenge sink in. The first team, or individual, to break 90% efficiency wins. The clock starts. Now. Blared. The room exploded into a frenzy of activity. Keyboards began to clatter like a hailstorm. Contestants shouted at each other, scribbling furiously on whiteboards, their faces illuminated by the glow of their multiple monitors. Samuel just sat there. He didn't type a single key. He stared at the swirling knot on the screen, his gaze distant, unfocused. The other contestants, fueled by adrenaline and ambition, were already diving in, throwing brute force and complex libraries at the problem. They were building elaborate scaffolding, trying to tame the chaos with more chaos. Samuel saw something different. He didn't see a logistics problem. He didn't see nodes and vectors. He saw a pattern, a familiar, beautiful, and deeply fundamental pattern he hadn't thought about in 30 years. A problem he had solved once before, on a mainframe computer the size of a small car, with less processing power than the phone in his pocket. It was a classic graph theory problem, disguised under layers of modern complexity. They had wrapped it in big data, dressed it up in real-time analytics, but at its core, its soul, it was an old ghost, and he knew how to exercise it. Hours bled into one another. The initial frantic energy of the room subsided into a low, tense hum of concentration. Pizza boxes piled up. Empty energy drink cans formed, small, metallic mountains. Young, brilliant minds wrestled with the Weaver's knot, their faces etched with frustration. The live leaderboard on the giant screen showed their progress. The top teams were hovering around 82%, inching their way forward in fractional percentages, their efficiency scores flickering like dying embers. Samuel's station remained an island of calm in the storm. He had spent the first few hours not writing code, but writing notes. On his paper pad, with a simple ballpoint pen, he sketched out diagrams, mathematical proofs, and logic flows. He was sharpening his axe, while everyone else was frantically trying to chop down the tree. Around the 12-hour mark, deep into the night, he finally began to type. His fingers moved across the old IBM keyboard with a steady, unhurried rhythm. Click, clack, click. The sound was an anachronism in the room of silent chiclet-keyed laptops. Each keystroke was deliberate, precise. He wasn't using any of the popular high-level frameworks the other teams were relying on. He was writing in pure, unadulterated C, a language as old and as powerful as the bedrock of a mountain. He was building his solution from first principles, crafting each line of code with the care of a watchmaker. It was during this quiet, focused work that he noticed the kid at the station next to him. He couldn't have been more than 20. He had the sharp, intelligent eyes of a prodigy and the arrogant posture of someone who had never failed at anything. His name, according to the placard at his station, was Leo. He was a solo competitor, like Samuel, and for most of the night, he had been at the top of the leaderboard. But now, he was stuck. Leo was staring at his screen, his face pale with exhaustion and fury. He would type a furious burst of code, run the simulation, and then slam his fist on the table as the efficiency score stubbornly refused to budge past 84.7%. He let out a low, guttural growl of frustration. He reminded Samuel of Kyle, not in his cruelty, but in his blind, youthful arrogance. He was trying to smash the problem with raw intellectual horsepower. But the problem was a lock, and he was using a hammer instead of a key dot. Samuel watched him for a moment. He saw the kid's mistake. It was a subtle, fundamental error in his approach to memory allocation, creating a bottleneck that throttled his entire algorithm. It was a classic rookie mistake, born of a reliance on modern languages that handled such things automatically, obscuring the machine-level truths of how a computer actually thinks. And here was the moral dilemma. Samuel's path to victory was clear. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that his own solution would work. He could sit here, say nothing, and watch the arrogant young prodigy burn out and fail. It would be a small, private piece of karmic justice. A lesson taught through silence. It was tempting. So tempting. It felt like a righteous reward for the humiliation he had endured. He could almost hear Kyle's laugh again, and the thought of vanquishing this younger version of him was a sweet, dark nectar. He looked at Leo's screen, at the elegant but flawed code. He saw the brilliance there, the raw, untamed talent. He saw the same fire that had once burned in him. And he saw himself, 40 years ago, staring at a green screen terminal, just as lost, just as frustrated. He remembered a senior engineer, a man named Arthur, with kind eyes and coffee-stained fingers, who had leaned over his shoulder and, instead of mocking him, had simply asked, "Have you thought about it from the memory's point of view?" That one sentence had changed everything. Samuel took a deep breath, the scent of stale coffee from his thermos filling his senses. He leaned over slightly towards the distraught young coder. "You're thinking about it as a river," Samuel said, his voice quiet, not wanting to draw attention. Leo jumped, startled. He glared at Samuel, his eyes defensive. "What?" "The data," Samuel clarified, nodding at the screen. "You're treating it like a river, trying to build dams and canals to direct it. But it's not a river. It's a flock of birds that doesn't want to be contained. It wants to be guided." Leo stared at him, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "It's a metaphor, not a solution." "It means your pointers are fighting each other," Samuel said plainly. "You're allocating and deallocating memory in a loop. You're creating traffic jams at the hardware level. The birds are crashing into each other." He didn't offer the solution. He just offered the clue, the key. It was up to Leo to turn it in the lock. He then turned back to his own screen, leaving the choice to the kid. For a long moment, Leo just sat there, fuming. Samuel could feel the young man's pride warring with his curiosity. Then, he heard a few hesitant keystrokes from the next station. A pause. More keystrokes. Samuel allowed himself a small, internal smile and went back to his work. He had made his choice. Vengeance was a bitter meal. Education was a legacy. The final hour of the hackathon was a blur of silent, frantic tension. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long pale fingers of light through the warehouse's high windows. Most of the contestants were running on fumes, their faces slack with exhaustion. Then, a gasp rippled through the room. On the main leaderboard, a new score had flashed into existence. Leo, 91.3%. A smattering of applause broke out. Leo stared at his screen, his mouth agape. He had done it. He looked over at Samuel, his eyes wide with a dawning, incredulous respect. Samuel met his gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Julian Croft, the CEO, who had been watching from the side stage, looked stunned. He had his winner. The PR nightmare was about to get a happy ending. He started to walk towards the stage, a relieved smile on his face. "Wait," someone shouted, pointing at the leaderboard. All eyes snapped back to the giant screen. Another score was climbing. A new name had appeared. a name that had been sitting at 0% for almost the entire competition. Sterling S. The number wasn't flickering. It was climbing, smoothly, relentlessly. Sterling S. 25% Sterling S. 45% Sterling S. 65%. A hush fell over the room. The clicking of Samuel's IBM keyboard was the only sound, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat, counting up to the inevitable. Sterling S. 85% Sterling S. 95%. The number kept climbing, past the theoretical maximum, past the limits of what anyone thought possible. Sterling S. 99.8%. It stopped. The number hung there, glowing in the semi-darkness. 99.8%. It was an impossible number. A perfect score. This was the moment. The visual that would be screenshotted and shared a million times. Samuel didn't furiously type his final line of code. He didn't celebrate. He simply entered the final command to compile and execute. Then, he did something no one expected. He stood up. He pushed his chair back, turned away from the keyboard, and calmly took a sip from his silver thermos as his code, his simple, elegant, C-based masterpiece, ran its final simulation on the main screen. The chaotic, swirling knot of data, the weaver's knot, pulsed once. Then, it resolved. The tangled nebula of lines snapped into a perfectly ordered, crystalline lattice. It was breathtaking. It wasn't just a solution. It was a work of art. The most complex logistics problem in the world, solved with a piece of code so small, so efficient. It was less than 100 lines long. The room was utterly silent. No one breathed. They were witnessing a miracle. A ghost from the past had just redefined the future. Samuel looked at Julian Croft, whose face was a mask of utter, dumbfounded shock. He looked at Leo, who was staring at him with the reverence of a disciple. He looked at the room full of young, brilliant minds who had just been taught a lesson they would never forget. Then, the silence broke. The room erupted. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar. A standing ovation from 200 of the brightest young coders in the country. A wave of pure, unadulterated respect that washed over him, healing the last of the wounds from that humiliating interview. Julian Croft stumbled to the microphone, his voice trembling. "Mr. Sterling, I don't understand. How is that possible? My team, the best minds from Stanford and MIT, they said it was impossible. They said the computational overhead." Samuel walked towards the stage, his steps unhurried. He took the microphone from the CEO's trembling hand. "You were looking for the answer in the wrong place," Samuel said, his voice calm and clear, echoing through the cavernous space. "You were trying to build a bigger, faster engine. You were adding complexity to fight complexity. But the answer wasn't in the future." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the faces of the young contestants. The answer was in the past. He then revealed the twist, the secret that reframed everything. This isn't a logistics problem at its heart. It's a modification of the traveling salesman problem, but with a non-Euclidean constraint set. It was first theorized in a paper by a Dr. Eris Thorne in 1985. He called it the ghost in the machine problem. He could never solve it, because the hardware of his time couldn't handle the recursive depth. But he laid out the mathematical framework. He left a map. Croft's face went white. "Dr. Thorne, he was my professor, my mentor. He founded the original company that Innovatech acquired. I never understood his final research papers. I thought they were the ramblings of an old man whose mind was failing." "His mind wasn't failing," Samuel said softly. "He was just ahead of his time. You were all trying to invent a new language, when all you had to do was learn to read the one that was already written." He had found the obscure, 40-year-old academic paper in a university's digital archive during his first few hours of research. While everyone else was looking at the latest tech blogs, he was digging through history. The power flip was absolute. In one weekend, Samuel had gone from being a forgotten fossil to the most revered programmer in the world. Innovatech didn't just offer him the $250,000 contract. They offered him a position as the head of a new R&D division, a blank check to build whatever he wanted. He accepted, but on one condition. His first hire was Leo, the young prodigy, humbled and hungry to learn, became his apprentice. Samuel didn't just take the job. He took the future with him, and he was going to shape it. Cruelty always collects its debt. Talent is timeless. Where are you reading this from? Drop your city, your state, your country. Let's see how far this story travels. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next Justice twist.